The rebirth of catastrophism has been catalyzed by the age of information, getting its hands on the history of evidence and analysis of Earth's catastrophe cycle, and the evidence suggesting the next one is unfolding now. By the end of this video, you will understand that this is much more than the rebirth of catastrophism. It is a complete science revolution, hiding in plain sight. When we compiled literally centuries of that evidence and analysis into our disaster movie and our book, we were trying to share the science while simultaneously revealing this science revolution. This was more expressly the case 6 months after the book was released on March 28, 2021. I plainly called it more than the rebirth of catastrophism, but a science revolution indeed. More papers and evidence and analysis had come out in that 6 months than I had seen in the decades of previous literature. It is now only 4 months since that postlude to the book and disaster movie, and assuming you have gotten through that postlude, we have to update again, because these scientific fields have hit the accelerator. But first, the Earth has hit the accelerator, and we've seen auroral anomalies and unexpected severity of space weather impacts. We've seen absurd land motions attempted to be blamed on farmers digging. Okay. We've seen the seas catch fire, not once actually, but twice. Allegedly the first was a broken pipe that coincidentally got hit by lightning, but the second one gave itself away more plainly in the mud ejection. We have seen such a surge in the Earth discharge version of lightning, upward, that they are starting to understand it very well. Talented people like Dan Robinson are able to get shots weekly that photographers used to dream of once in a lifetime. There have been no less than 50 papers in the last 4 months identifying one or more of the last magnetic excursion events, some from cave sediments, others from corings, but we continue to see the cycle, even though some still confuse Lake Mungo and Mono Lake, and even today, many confuse Le Champ with the half-cycle Adams event around 42,000 years ago. It shows up a lot, and so do the half events Hili Nepali and the Noah event, 18,000 and 6,000 years ago. There have been dozens of new recurrent nova, leaving a star behind or performing encores of previously seen events, and seen many more nova-level events with energies no bigger than the sun's solar flares. And in terms of driving forward the known science, the importance of the sun's current sheet, the solar wind BY, the interplanetary magnetic and electric field, is as big a factor in Earth's electrodynamic near-space interactions as CMEs and coronal holes. Of course, these are major impact studies in big journals to the tune and detail I used to expect over years' time, and they are important because they tell us about what the galactic current sheet is doing to our solar system and nearby stars now, and what it's going to do to the sun. And speaking of the galactic current sheet itself, the high-level modeling is getting unbelievable, especially in terms of how many waves they are producing in just a small section of the galactic interior, more than the total number of visible dusty spiral arms in the galaxy as a whole. They have also begun to discover more of the expected small-scale features like the filaments running the interstellar magnetic field, the galactic magnetic field through the midplane. M82 was discovered to have almost identical character to the Milky Way in the models, and while plasma and electric cosmologists like to think of magnetic fields other than necessarily being open or closed, it's literally the qualitative description of the interplanetary magnetic field connections through the solar wind. Just, this is at the stellar and galactic scale. Now that would be the peak in galactic astrophysics for the last 4 months, if the key competing theory to this one wasn't obliterated again by Bennett and Bovee. While the waves would still inflict the same effects on the sun and solar system if it was due to a dwarf galaxy collision ripple, we do like to get the entire story right, which is why we wanted to add to the knowledge of the amplitude of the galactic current sheet waves of 60 to 170 parsecs, the wavelength of those rippling undulations, tens of light years across. Compare that to the visible arms of the spiral galaxy, 1,000 light years across or more. Of course, the real zenith of the galactic astrophysics news the last quarter was the identification of those waves themselves, here in our neighborhood. It's actually where the wavelength data came from, and the hum and associated anomalous signals all help solidify the notion we are inside the galactic current sheet right now. Our look at nearby stars continued. Proxima's continued activation in the wake of its super outburst a decade ago continues, and we can say the same for Barnard's star, since its exoplanet was debunked, meaning its luminosity changes are due to its luminosity. We also have the first look at Wolf 359 in about 2 years. This one is out ahead of Barnard, and we confirm it's superflaring. Its initial activation would have been before the modern scopes that could see it. Mars is really the only planetary level change we saw updated the last 4 months, but the confirmation and continuation of its anomalous seismicity, which is predicted to ring even higher soon based on the patterns, is an indication of the great shift on the red planet as well. We saw more detailed identification of the non-human extinction parameters for megafauna during the last event about 12,000 years ago, and while we've seen about a dozen articles on the minutiae of the bird magnetoreception, the shark study was clearly the observer's favorite in the magnetobiology realm. Now we're going to get to the big stories. Folks, this one debunked the last great doubt about the imminence of danger in Earth's magnetic situation. Some have drawn comfort in Earth's relatively high modern field strength compared to paleomagnetic records, but as we've responded for years, no. How strong you get inside of the cycle doesn't relieve you of the cycle. When it's your time, it's time. Up next, it's the large low shear velocity provinces, the LLSVPs, the massive internal skeleton of Earth, and they're getting better at mapping its fingers up to hotspots, with a confirmation of the direct connection between the core and Hawaii, those near the Spanish islands in the Atlantic, and Reunion in the Indian Ocean. We also learned that the core of Earth is lopsided. All that stuff about symmetrical Earth immune to perturbation instabilities is out the window from the surface terrain down to the core. The total global electric circuit connections with the solar wind provide further evidence of how our star will be affected under the galactic magnetic reversal coming with the current sheet. What is most interesting is the rapid forcing identification, also important to solar climate forcing, even faster than the minute scale forcing on clouds that we've seen before, near instantaneous, instant, light speed fast in terms of the forcing influence of geomagnetic dings from the sun. Speaking of that, the unusual chorus waves at the top of the sky are a sign of changing upper Earth under the weakening magnetic field. The total electrical influence on lightning has gone beyond the Arctic to allow for the identification of 2 new kinds of lightning this summer alone. The weakening field is driving critical frequency changes in the F2 layer and is allowing for sustained ionospheric disruptions despite weakening solar activity. Despite that lower solar flare impact the last couple decades, the Earth has been taking an equal pounding due to the weakening protection. And we have also seen the carbon story, the Arctic story, and the real cause of climate change collide as even the lower atmospheric chemistry in reaction is changing now. We had a fantastic update on Earth's rotation glitches being tied to geomagnetic jerks from the core, and we saw that they were actually mistaken. Both the cycles they identified are basically solar cycles known in other fields to be connected already. We got more on the conspiracy side after learning that Major White did more than just Project Nanook in the Arctic. He directed and appointed spies in Europe and Africa immediately afterwards, a weird task for a pilot explorer, and then was in charge of manned spaceflight operations for Apollo, which found the glass and other evidence of the Great Solar Flash. By the way, the best evidence for the Earth turning over 90 degrees comes from the evidence Major White stole from the Pentagon meetings to give to his son to publish years later. And in that same vein, these scientists are right now being tricked and trying to figure out how dinosaurs may actually not have been cold-blooded. Otherwise, they couldn't live where they found these eggs in the Arctic. Of course, the other explanation is that this region wasn't at the pole during that cycle, and the only reason those eggs were found and preserved in the first place is because a warm area was rapidly inundated and frozen in time. As if the no ejection nova events we've previously seen weren't amazing enough, we've seen 2 no luminosity ejection nova events, one at the giant star that blinked, and a confirmation of that hypothesis for Betelgeuse as well. Sometimes the main, primary, and seemingly only nova component is the thick dust, and you don't get a major flash. Some think the other giant star has an orbiting disk that's occulting it, but they've never seen it before or since, and they know Betelgeuse's dust came from a dust ejection event on the star itself. After wondering for years if indeed this government, university, and private interest-funded visual was a centrifugal breakout nova from the equatorial region of the sun, rather than a CME as the video label suggests, we learn they have found exactly that out in space, and it matches the predicted solar micronova energy range we have forecasted, if not a touch smaller. Hopefully, We recall the sun's magnetic fields are changing and that the helium abundance is changing. We got the confirmation and update of that discovery just a few weeks ago. The sun's helium abundance has begun to change, and it won't be many years before this takes over visually. Then, of course, the paper of the year so far, the identification and naming of one of the key cycles at the foundation of Earth's disaster cycle, the connection between major solar events and the half-cycle climate smacks on the planet, the Heinrich events. The solar events finally joined at the hip in the publications, as they have been in the sediment and throughout time. Folks, there are now almost no remaining holes in the total theory, and that's including the minutiae, which wouldn't even really affect the outcome one bit. But the best question at this moment should be this, or maybe more appropriately phrased, what the heck is going on? Why do I have more to report by the month, by the week? Why are the key arms of the disaster so well studied now after being fringe and cringe for a distinguished professor just a decade ago? Those papers are the top professors, top folks from NASA and major organizations, the journals with gatekeepers and the peer reviewers. There are two answers to why this is happening, and the first one is there is an absurd number of scientists who are starting to get it. On a weekly basis, I coordinate with dozens of those scientists at various universities and organizations, and they know what's coming. They know what they can publish, and they know how to use their free time wisely. This is spilling over into abundance recognition, citation power, and more. And that is where the second part comes in. You. Folks, our silent friends in high places at NASA and ESA and national labs and prestigious campuses, they have a message for you. You are driving this change. You click the links. You watch the videos. You discuss the topics and share information. Do you understand how views, downloads, and citations of papers leads to a direct change in the researchers, the journals, and the direction of the fields? When a journal that averages a few dozen or maybe 100 views on its top articles a year does one special episode on magnetic excursions, gets thousands of views and downloads per paper, that it doesn't affect them? It's been affecting them this entire time. You have been. Let's keep going, because the snowball is rolling now, and it's all downhill from here. I'll see you in the morning for the daily update. Be safe, everyone.